folks joining through an online view as well. Art, how many people do we have online? Can you see?
Do you know, Bailey?
And we're
chat with you more in depth.
It fell off and
the work that we're doing outside of the preserve. And some folks have asked the question, what is the new benefit? What are we getting out of looking outside of the preserve? And there's a couple things that I just wanted to talk about that tonight specifically. One of the things that I can tell you all, and you can rest assured, is at least 90%, if not more, of what we do is still at our core. Our stewardship of the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy. And the 8 to 10% that we're doing outside of it is for great reasons. And people have asked me, why? What is that great reason? And we've got multiple pieces. A lot of you know that we are passionate about the preserve because we have the opportunity to be in it often, sometimes every day. And we know we love it, but we recently did a community assessment. Our stakeholders throughout the city, elected officials, city staff, citizens from South Scottsdale, citizens from Central Scottsdale, and a lot of folks still don't know, A, what would it look like to take care of the preserve in perpetuity? So if you remember, the first two taxes were for capital improvements and acquisition, nothing for maintaining it. So currently what the city budgets for its expenses and potentially a partnership with us in the future comes out of the general fund. So the city council, the preserve commission, and the conservancy spent the 2.5 years through COVID Scottsdale identifying is a renewal of the preserve tax to be able to have ongoing funding to care for the preserve. So instead of depending on the general fund and the fluctuations of the economy, having a source of funding, just like the preserve tax did to buy the preserve, to maintain it. And most of you will hopefully agree with a $6 billion and a little bit higher for each respectively, people still showed up to say no. So if you think in the first tax we had 37,000 voters show up, in the second tax we had 31,000 voters show up, and that was in 2004. That November in the general election, 104,000 voters showed up. And with this potentially being on the ballot in November of 2024, being a presidential election, and this political climate, we're estimating over 120 to 130,000 voters are going to show up. And we want to make sure that they're aware of this, they're aware of the need, and that they're supportive of the work we're doing. Additionally, having that work outside of the preserve garners us to a much larger base of support. More people who can fall in love with the work that you're doing and that the Conservancy is doing and support us to be able to continue to do more work. We also talk about the importance of a lot of our donors reach out to me and say, we love the fact that you are focusing education programs in the schools for that next generation. Because they're like, we love the preserve, we love open spaces, but we're not going to be here forever. So the Conservancy proactively working to show the next generation of stewards, the next generation of preserve lovers, why it's important to them, especially in today's era where their cell phone and Instagram and TikTok are the most important things to them. It's great if we can make them understand that they need to care for this place long past when we're gone. Secondly, one of the things we've been working with the city on why we want the city to help us focus on our partnerships outside of the preserve, is we know the Conservancy in the city of Scottsdale has a finite amount of resources. We have so much we can do with what we have, but by having these partnerships with other organizations, whether it be the county park, whether it be the national parks, whether it be our education partners at Asombro in New Mexico, not only are we giving them our resources, but they're giving us theirs. We have access to their resources to benefit the preserve, which we would not have otherwise if we just stayed insular. So we are able to leverage many more organizations' assets in the work that we do to protect our amazing place. So when we look outside at the work that we're doing outside, there's a couple places that you can help if you'd love to. We have the newly launched community engagement program, which is going to be going out and representing the Conservancy at different community functions. So those of you that had a chance to go down to Canal Convergence and see the tens of thousands of folks that we got to tell about the work we're doing, that's an example of our community engagement program. As well, our education programs for youth. You all are familiar with Expedition Days. It just happened in the preserve, and we're very excited that we were able to get over 600 students to the program, but we're limited on capacity. We're limited on resources on who can come here. And one of the greatest needs that's been identified by our stakeholders and our supporters is how awesome would it be if you could bring Expedition Days to them. So last year we launched our On the Road program that allowed us to go into the classrooms and educate over 1,800 students in the classrooms by bringing the preserve to them. So by doing both, we're able to grow those even more. So if you are interested in Expedition Days on the Road or community engagement, reach out to Brian or Claire or our staff members to help connect you to those. But I want to remind everyone, the preserve is the core of what we do. It always has been, and it always will be. But we are leveraging these resources outside of it to be able to benefit us so much more and return that benefit to our stakeholders. The next thing I just wanted to talk about, and the last thing, because it does come up. People say the Conservancy's gone through exponential growth in the past couple of years. It came out and it flourished out of COVID. And one of the things that I get stewards sometimes asking me is, does my donation matter? You just got a big Parsons grant, you just got the Office of Tourism grant, you've got all this great support. How do I make a difference? And one of the things that I want to reiterate to everyone is that by having a broad range of community support is how it makes a difference. By having large community support at whatever level people can afford to give is what encourages those major institutions to come make their gift. If we only had a handful of folks giving us gifts, we might not look as stable, we might not look as if we have enough community buy-in. So the importance of every single gift, no matter how big or small, is what we leverage to get those large ones. So the next time you see a big gift and say, does my donation make a difference? Please know, it absolutely does, because we never would have had an opportunity to get those bigger grants without the broad community support we have from the stewards in our community. And then this was my housekeeping one. Please also remember to log all of your hours. So one of the nice things that we're able to do that a lot of folks don't realize, because I made a light heart of it because we always talk about logging your hours, but one of the great things that we leverage in all of your hours is the opportunity to list those as matching grants. So when we go out to a funder and ask for funding, they say, okay, well, who else is contributing to this cause? And because we track hours and the equivalent value of hourly time against those, we're able to list those as matching contributions to funders and leverage that even more to support our work. So I'll go ahead and close out with, I really love anybody who's interested in helping us engage in these different communities, whether they be in South Scottsdale, whether they be outside of Scottsdale, or whether they be in the preserve. Just come ask questions, come let us know, because we now have the research and now with the data to show us that by having this broader community support, we are a more secure organization and we are able to cover the work that we do better. But also, please donate according to your means. Every contribution matters, every contribution counts, and without all of them, we wouldn't be able to do the great work we do. And with that, I'll turn it back to Carrie.
Yep. Any questions? No questions.
See? No questions.
So being involved with steward education, I've developed an interest in hearing stories about engagements and stewards that engage people on the preserve. I was talking to our next speaker, Art, recently, and he shared an engagement he had with a visitor in the preserve. As the engagement developed, the subject of careers came up, and we all know that Art's a doctor, a surgeon to boot. So Art tells this visitor that he spent his career working in a room with no windows. The visitor, without pausing, says, "So you were in jail?" And with that, class of 36 and chair of our core leadership team, Art.
Gary, I left that question open. I don't think the guy, I think he's still wondering. Thanks everybody for coming out, and it's good to see everybody live again and kind of get back to somewhat normal. So back in the mid-90s, Ginger and I are sitting having dinner with a friend of ours who was a dentist, and said, you know, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going with this medical group to Honduras, and they want me to set up a dental clinic. And so my wife, who has absolutely no experience in the dental world, says, well, you're going to need some help, so I'm going to go with you. So I'm kind of crawling under the chair, and I had to go home and look up where Honduras was on the paper atlas. You know, this is before Google. And so about a month later, I'm on a bus that, you know, the classic chicken bus going through rural Honduras on a road that took us 8 hours to go 40 miles. And we arrived in a clinic, and to make a long story short, we both fell in love with the organization and the people there. And the mission was very simple. They had one mission, and that was to provide medical care, which eventually became to 60,000 people. The program was run by one very dedicated physician, and we had 0.5 paid staff with a lot of volunteers. So let's move to kind of a parallel universe, if there is such a thing, between Scottsdale and rural Honduras. So we have the Conservancy and the land trust before it. And again, this organization has one mission, and that is to attain land and maintain land and preserve land in the preserve. We have a couple of very, very dedicated leaders, and we have a lot of volunteers and a pretty limited staff. So we have some parallels going on here. So back to Honduras, as the years go on, we have a lot more programs. We start into education, we start into dentistry, optometry, nutrition, clean water. You kind of get the picture. The organization is growing. We still have a dedicated physician who has no business sense whatsoever. It's pretty typical. I think we're up to like 0.75 now of a paid staff and a bunch of volunteers. So back to the Conservancy, similar things are going on. Now we have education. We have, well, Pathfinders back then. I don't have to put $1 in the jar for saying that. We're into education. We're doing research. We have a science program. We have lots and lots of programs. We still have very dedicated leaders. We have very limited staff. But the big group of very dedicated volunteers is making this organization run and making it expand, and we're reaching out to a lot more people. So back to Honduras. Unfortunately, Umbro, the organization, is now kind of dying on the vine. And why is that? Well, first of all, the programs are becoming very difficult to manage without staff. The next thing is we're going broke. We don't have any money because we're not raising money. We don't have professional hired staff to raise money. And probably one of the most important things is that we've been there for 25 years now, and the next generation and the present generation, they're starting to take us for granted. We've always been there. So why aren't we always going to be there? So we're out promoting our programs and what we're doing, but we're not promoting ourselves. The organization is not doing well. And the volunteers just can't seem to make it run because they have real life jobs and other commitments. So now we're in the Conservancy again. It's 2016. We still have dedicated leaders. We have 1 million, 400 or 500 volunteers that are very dedicated, but we're running out of money. In fact, we're almost bankrupt. And we have used up all reserves, and we have less than $100,000 in the bank. So the board makes some drastic changes, hires Justin, starts hiring staff. We have scientists now, we have paid educators, and we have foundation people that are raising money. So our fiscal situation is good. It's solid now, as you'll hear from many reports. So we're in good shape. But we still have an issue, and that is that we're promoting all our programs. People know what we do, but they don't know who we are out there. My neighbors think when I put my Conservancy jersey on and get on my bike, they think I belong to a bike club. They have no idea that it's that's a Conservancy. So today I have three things to ask. One is that use every opportunity you can as a steward to get to know the staff. Work with the staff. They're wonderful people. They're skilled, and they're dedicated, and they're really vital. We need to work with staff, and we need the staff to work with us in order to make this program go forward. The second thing is a little bit of what Justin said. I'd ask you to get involved with our 2 new programs. We have a program, Youth Education, and that's the outreach, and that's to prevent kind of what I said happened back in Honduras. We need to educate the next generation, because who's going to look after this place when we're not around if we don't have people that value and treasure the open spaces that we have. The other new program I'd like you to really encourage you to get involved with is the community engagement. It's really kind of along the same lines. We're out there trying to educate the public of who we are and what we do. And these are the voters. These are more of the adults, but it's the same message. And we're going to need that more and more as for the potential tax votes and things that Justin alluded to. And finally, I'd just like to say that remember when you're out there with your blue shirt on, or even when you're in a restaurant without your blue shirt and you're with people that might want to know about the Conservancy, think of yourself as a member of the Conservancy. That's really a subtle difference. But the preserve will never go away in our role, but we need to start thinking of ourselves as a Conservancy. So In conclusion, we really like to take our grandkids out into the desert. And about a month or so ago, I was out there with Cooper, our 8-year-old. And this is unsolicited. I never talked to him and never said anything about this. We didn't discuss this. But he said, Papa, he said, are they going to build houses here? So, thank you.
Just checking. While Melissa gets mic'd up, Melissa Guardaro, did I get it right?
Yes.
Is an assistant research professor in the Julianne Wrigley Global Institute of Sustainability at Arizona State University. Her research focuses on adaptation, equity, vulnerability, urban policy, and governance for the mitigation and adaptation to extreme heat and urban heat island effects. She is currently working with the City of Phoenix to formulate a comprehensive heat reduction strategy, and with the Nature Conservancy, the Maricopa County Health Department, and community-based organizations to create neighborhood heat solutions that improve thermal comfort, public health outcomes, and especially during extreme heat. Melissa completed a PhD in sustainability from Arizona State University, a master's degree in sustainability and environmental management from Harvard, and an MBA from Columbia University. But more importantly, in January of this year, Melissa attended Class 90 and completed her training to become a steward. Please join me in a warm welcome, Melissa Guardaro.
I'm really happy to be here to talk about my favorite subject, which is extreme heat. Okay, not working. Oh, here we go. So, heat is a multi-dimensional problem. And I think a lot of times people think, oh, let's plant some trees and everything will be okay. But I hope by the end of this presentation you'll understand that so many different sectors really feed into this problem of extreme heat. So it's not your imagination, it actually is getting hotter over time. And I do a lot of work in Phoenix, Mesa, and Tempe. I just had my first meeting with people from the city of Scottsdale this morning, so branching out. But this is a chart of maximum temperatures for the city of Phoenix. And you can see, historically, over time, by month, indeed, it is getting hotter. But more importantly is this chart of minimum temperatures. And this is the lowest that it gets. It's usually around 5 o'clock in the morning. And you can see that this has really drastically changed. And you actually solve these by two different ways. This is a result of climate change. And this is where the hot gets hotter, the wet gets wetter, the dry gets drier. But this one is a product of the urban heat island. So extreme heat is certainly a threat multiplier, and these are just some of the areas that it impacts. There's increased water usage, as you know, because it's so dry here. Economic impacts, we've seen estimates that are in the billions. There's also a public health component to it, too. And every death that we have here in the valley is totally avoidable. And I want to repeat that again, that every death we have here in the valley is totally avoidable. We also have impacts on energy demand, air quality, and something that all of us in the extreme heat space right now are really focusing on thermal comfort. So we're not going to cool down the parking lot at Costco. We've given up on that. But we want to cool down where people are as they move through their day. So this is a chart of the number of days that are over 100. And when I give this talk outside of Phoenix, people are just horrified by this chart. Like, oh my God, and I say, 100 isn't bad, right? Like 100 is June. And there's a couple of lines that I want you to take note of. And the dark red one is the number of days over 100 for 2022. And you can see we're about average. But the really problematic one is the thin red line. And this was 2020. And I know that it was COVID and nobody went anywhere, but we had a year in 2020 that is what the climate is to be projected for 2035. So 100 is okay, right? But 110, not okay. Like 110, we're starting to get into the unbearable part. So when you see for 2020, we had 53 days over 110 degrees. Human health starts to be compromised at around 95 degrees. When the temperature doesn't go below 85 degrees, that also impacts human health. This is way off the charts. So this is the minimum temperature, and once again, this has to do with our urban form. So I'm going to show another chart later, but this is the built surfaces, materials that really maintain the heat. So you can see here that we had 50 days this year where the minimum didn't go below 85. And yet in 2020, we had, oh, I don't have that on here, but in 2020, we had like 75 days that it was 85 degrees or higher. Now I realize that this calendar has the wrong year on it, but this is heat warning days, and there's no absolute temperature for the National Weather Service to produce a heat warning. It has to do with the increase over the previous 3 to 5 days, and then it also has to do with how hot it's going to be for a certain period of time. So you will see a heat warning be issued in June for 108, 105 degrees, but you will see that that will be not a heat warning day in August. So this year, we had 18 heat warning days, and in 2020, we had 48. All right, I'm going to try to run this video right now.
6 people became overcome with heat illness, and they couldn't make it down the mountain on their own.
One of the hikers died. It turns out he was a doctor, a neurologist at a Phoenix hospital. Fox 10's Nicole Garcia has the story.
We've been responding on a lot because of the extreme heat. People are just not paying attention to the extreme heat.
MCSO's Fox 1 helicopter, along with air rescue technicians from fire departments across the valley, have been called out to more and more mountain rescues recently.
We are using helicopters more, unfortunately. It's a really high-risk thing for us to do.
Rescues like Monday's incident in Cave Creek are happening more often. Dr. Evan Deshawn was hiking in a group with 5 other people. Rescue crews arrived around 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon. 5 people, who all had run out of water and were lost, were flown off the mountain. Unfortunately, Dr. Deshawn did not make it. Meanwhile, other fire crews attempted to reach the group on the ground.
For us to put 6 or 7 crews on the trail like we did yesterday, they made it 3 miles in, and the group was 4.5 miles in. We're really asking a lot of our firefighters to be on that trail, to stay hydrated, and they're in the heat and the elements, and now we have to worry about getting them off the trail.
Even firefighters are told to stay indoors, hydrate, and avoid strenuous outdoor activities when the temperatures reach 105 and above.
Big regional drills that are planned, if it's hot today, we won't go do those. We'll stay inside and hydrate and take care of our people.
Barrow Neurological Institute released a statement saying in part, "We are deeply saddened by the tragic passing of Dr. Evan Deshawn." Dr. Deshawn was a bright and gifted physician who had recently begun his first year as a neurology resident at Barrow Neurological Institute. He was a kind and generous person. And fire officials say for those who still want to venture out on a hike during an extreme heat wave, they've got some advice. Hydrate the night before, have a plan in case of an emergency, and if you use up half of the water you brought with you on the hike, that's when you should turn back and go to the start of the trailhead. Reporting live, I'm Nicole Garcia, Fox 10 News.
What I was really struck about with this report is that these were physicians, and I know that I'm fresh out of the box being a steward, but I think that if I saw 5 people, and they're in their early 30s too, and I asked them if they had water, they'd say, yeah, we're physicians. I'm not so sure I would have pushed back. I would have thought that they would have known better. And that's the reason why I say that all heat deaths are avoidable. So in Maricopa County, we actually have a really robust heat surveillance program where in many parts of the country, they don't record a death due to heat, either caused by heat or compounded by heat. But we do that here in the county. And as a result, the numbers that you see here, while tragic and shocking, sometimes add up to more than what the CDC reports for the rest of the country. So this is particularly troublesome for 2020 and 2021 because we actually had a moratorium on evictions and a moratorium on utility disconnections. We had an explosion of unhoused population. So the numbers aren't any better for 2022. They're just about estimating 391 deaths. There's one that's still uncertain. So you can see that this is an increasing problem as well. So this is a chart. The red line on the top are the daily maximum temperatures, and that's how hot it gets, probably around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the blue line are the daily minimum temperatures. And the green line are the number of heat-associated deaths. So you can see that this gets concentrated very early in the season. And a lot of it has to do with people not being acclimated to it and just not taking precautions along the way. And the same thing holds true also for heat-related illnesses too, that it tends to skew very early in the heat season. So I always marvel that I leave my house in Tempe, and by the time I get to my favorite spot in Granite Mountain, it's about a good 10 to 15 degrees cooler than at my house. And a lot of this has to do with the urban heat profile. And there's no one urban heat, it's a necklace of different urban heat islands. So you don't even need to be a scientist, you can just drive around in your car and you can see the temperature difference. And a lot of this has to do with the urban form and what it's comprised of. So you can see the difference on your left-hand side between the desert environment, where it gets as hot as any other place. But it also gets much cooler. There's that big differential that you see where the desert really cools down because the materials do not hold on to the heat. In the urban core, that difference is much smaller, that it doesn't cool down. And this is really important because we can fix this. We can fix this where people are. But the problem is that we don't fix it everywhere, and we don't fix it where it's most important starting off. This is a map of the banking industry from the 1940s, and this is where they were advised where to invest and where not to invest. So the areas that you see in red, those are the red-lined areas in Phoenix. And this is a chart today from 2020, that this lack of investment over time has resulted in these areas being the hottest part of the valley even today. Okay, so I have another video for you, and the work that's shown in here is part of the work that we did in 3 underserved neighborhoods, 2 in Phoenix, 1 in Mesa, and we went into communities and we really listened to what they had to say about heat. First of all, they thought we were nuts because they said it's the desert, it's hot, there's nothing they can do. But then when they really found out that there was something they could do, we have these 3 heat action plans that are very specific for neighborhoods. The one for the Mesa neighborhood is now part of the Mesa Climate Plan, and the 2 that are for the South Phoenix neighborhood and one for Edison Eastlake, which is a huge HUD redevelopment project. Dr. Dave Handula, who is the Chief Heat Officer for the City of Phoenix, has said that he will follow through on all of those plans too. Woohoo!
I'm looking at a map of surface temperatures in the Phoenix metro area. So this is in Arizona in the southwest US, and it shows how hot the ground is in June. And this is a map of child poverty rates. Darker blue means more poverty. So this is heat, and this is poverty. Heat, poverty. Heat, poverty. The correlation is pretty obvious. This is where it becomes clear that climate change and wealth inequality are not really separate issues. And you can probably find examples of that wherever you go in the world. But for this story, I went there.
An extensive heat warning is in effect.
Warmer is the new normal in Phoenix.
The city grappling with an increase in heat-related deaths.
Phoenix last year hitting 100 degrees or higher for more than 144 days.
Climate change is one factor causing rising temperatures. Urban development is the other.
The forecasted high that day was 112 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 44 degrees Celsius. But in reality, some areas can feel warmer or cooler than that. So here I am in a neighborhood with some of the hottest surface temperatures. But when I drove 8 miles north of there, I was in one of the coolest parts of Phoenix. And it was in the hot neighborhood where I met up with Eva Olivas. She's a local community advocate and a Phoenix native. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Can you tell me a little bit about this neighborhood and who lives here?
So the community of Central City South is located just south of the downtown business district. The average income level for a family of four is about $19,000. The vehicle ownership rate is between 23 to 28% of the population.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, very low. So they're very dependent on public transportation.
This zip code has the highest rate of heat-related illnesses in the city. What makes people here vulnerable to extreme heat?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. We have the freeway, we have the railroad tracks on the north, we have the airport on the east. So we're like a little pocket.
A lot of pavement.
A lot of concrete, a lot of industry here. A lot of our streets, as you can see, don't have sidewalks. You're having to walk in the street like we are. And there's not a lot of shade. If you can look around, you don't see a lot of trees.
This is the Sonoran Desert, so of course the summers are hot. But it also seems like this entire city was almost designed to capture heat. The streets are so wide. This isn't a highway, this is just the Phoenix grid. And the buildings are so flat and set back from the sidewalks, so they don't create much shade at all. And then there's the parking lots. I read one estimate there are more than 4 parking spots for every car in Phoenix. The sun just beams into all that pavement, and it doesn't just roast anyone who happens to be walking across it, it's also transferring heat to the air day and night. Wow, I really did that poorly. Also, I promise this is not a Chevy ad, I just borrowed my dad's car. So, what do you do to try to mitigate heat in a city like this? Well, reflective roofs can help a bit. The thermal image shows the surface temperature of the dark roof is hotter than the white ones, and the city has also tried painting some roads with a more reflective coating. But if you compare the hottest and coolest neighborhoods, it's pretty clear that the big difference between them isn't the black or white surfaces, it's the green ones.
Plants are the variable that connects this map of heat to this map of poverty. And studies have confirmed that the cooling effect of cool roofs and cool pavements, it's smaller than the cooling effect of trees.
One of the best ways to beat the urban heat.
The more trees you plant, the more benefits.
Cleansing for the air.
Reduce carbon footprint.
Lower levels of stress.
Decrease energy costs.
Stormwater management, a very important engine of cooling.
If you take an area that's just parking lots and buildings and cover at least a quarter of the space with trees, you can lower air temperatures there by around 8 degrees Fahrenheit or 4.4 degrees Celsius. That's according to a study from Arizona State University. For those who are used to humid summers, it can be hard to understand just how much relief shade provides in a dry heat. You can easily see the temperature difference on my arms and on the concrete there. So the city of Phoenix has committed funds to planting more trees. They want all neighborhoods to reach a minimal level of canopy cover by 2030.
And I love the idea of recruiting an army of trees to protect the vulnerable from extreme heat. But there's a problem.
Outside of parks and along major streets, the urban forest currently depends not on public resources, but on private ones. What would it take for a street like this one to become one of those shady tree-lined streets that they have uptown?
Well, any tree that's planted in this neighborhood in front of someone's home, they would have to maintain. The city does not maintain them in front of these residential areas.
I see, okay. So there are some utility companies here that will give you a couple of free trees if you agree to plant them on the west side or the south side of your home, because eventually that can end up saving something like 30% on your air conditioning bill. But it sounds like that doesn't really solve the maintenance issue.
Correct, because there's that trade-off between shade or increased water bill. But it's the cost of maintaining the trees that is challenging, obviously in a very low-income neighborhood like ours, and it's not a priority for them in their family, in their home.
Right. Are there no programs that are actually going to take on the watering cost?
Zero. That is the responsibility of the homeowner. And you have to remember, what did I say? These are mostly renters.
I walked with Eva along Buckeye Road, where there's a big triangular lot. It's owned by the city and has been left unplanted. She said that would probably change with the city's new tree equity plans, but she also hoped for some more basic things, like sidewalks and shade shelters for all the bus stops.
It was a reminder that wealth already affects access to infrastructure, even infrastructure that doesn't have to be watered and pruned. And that's what will have to change if cities like Phoenix want to make sure that the heaviest burdens of climate warming don't fall on those who are least prepared to withstand them.
So I guess I should have started off by saying if anybody has clarifying questions, please feel free to ask it, because I get very excited and I will keep on going on, and hopefully we'll get out by 6. So part of my research is also listening to people and trying to hear the stories that, and how they define their lives and how they cope with extreme heat. And this is really important because I think for so many people, you have this idea that everybody's coping the same way you are, and nothing could be further than the truth for that. So the first group that came up from these interviews that I did all over the valley was that heat is an inconvenience. And these are people who go from their air-conditioned house to their air-conditioned car to their air-conditioned school or work. Their life really isn't changed very much. Maybe they change the timing of things that they do, but it's really not impacting them at all in a serious way. And they kind of view this as a game, like, should I go get my ice cream during lunch, or should I wait until I pick it up after work, or things like that. It's not something that's really taken seriously. And these people are actually very sure that the city is taking care of those who are less fortunate than we are. And for them, there's just no real difficult life choices about heat. It's just really a super inconvenience. And then there's another group, and these people manage everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. They manage their budget, they manage their outdoor exposure, they manage their thermostat in their house, up a degree, down a degree, all sorts of things. So for them, this heat season is something that they plan for and they manage for. And they don't really have a feeling of panic about it because it's in their budget. They will have budget billing for their electricity bill. And there's a big reliance on networks, family networks, to make sure that they're keeping each other safe along the way. But the third group, and I want to point out that everybody in this group was working full time. The third group, heat is just an absolute catastrophe. And for them, they know they're not going to get a summertime bonus. They know that they're facing increasing electricity bills. They rely on public transit, and or they work outdoors, or they're delivery workers, or they work in giant warehouses that just really can't be air conditioned. And they know that they are going to get sick from the heat. It's just something that they know is going to happen. And there was panic and there was stress, and it was really visible. And when I asked the first group, the heat is an inconvenience group, how much does your electricity bill change from January to June? They're like, nah, not bad, I don't even know, maybe $300 a month, maybe. When I asked this last group, how much does your electricity bill increase from January through June? They said, it's just terrible. We don't know where we're going to get this. We have to decide between two really poor choices. Do we pay for rent, or do we pay for our electricity? Do we not put the air conditioning on and then know that my kid is going to have an asthma attack? And the swing was $50 a month. So for $200 a year, we have a whole class of people that are really making terrible choices. They don't have a choice but to make choices between very difficult situations along the way. But all is not bleak, because we do have solutions that we can work on. But I really need you to think where you fall on this spectrum and how you would approach some of these solutions along the way, realizing that you don't fit into the catastrophic group. You're somebody who manages stuff, but not everybody else does. So there's a book out there by Kim Stanley Robinson. Has anyone read The Ministry of the Future? It's kind of thick, but the first chapter is quite an eye-opener, and it opens with a heat wave in Pakistan, and there it's really high humidity. And the temperatures soar to 125 degrees, and the human body cannot keep yourself cool. And certain people have backup power and air conditioners, and the whole society just kind of devolves over a period of 2 or 3 days. And it's written from the perspective of a physician who runs a clinic. And he is trying to help as many families as he can. He has them in this room that's air conditioned with the generator, and somebody robs them at gunpoint. Fast forward, he leaves, because now you're indoors, and it's even worse indoors. And he goes to the lake where everybody has tried to cool off, but the lake is also hot. And 20 million people die in this heat wave. And it becomes a wake-up call for people to try to move forward and look for solutions. And the rest of the book is just really going through a list of evidence-based scientific solutions to wacky and weird. They're just trying everything along the way. And I feel like in some ways this is where we are with managing heat, that we have to try everything. And you see how trees work for some people, but it won't work for other communities. In fact, the communities that I work in, they don't want trees. It's just too much of a bother. And I don't know if anybody's ever had a tree removed. You know how expensive that is, and it's something that they are not going to pay for at all. So while you hear we have tree planting programs, especially through our utility companies, that's just not even in the selection set right now until you can get rid of the older trees. But we have a whole bunch of places that are really adopting heat action planning, including here in the city of Scottsdale. We have climate action planning that is going on throughout the region. And this includes not only heat, but drought and storms, and how are we as a collective society going to manage those things going into the future? And there's two different components to it, right? Remember the first chart in the beginning was all about how we're just having this background getting hotter, and that's due to climate change, and you mitigate that by reducing your greenhouse gases. But then we also have the urban form, and we just love to build here, but you can build with a heat equity lens as you're putting together your projects. So if you have apartment buildings and the shade that the apartment buildings cast is over the public street, the public transit area, you're actually killing two birds with one stone, right? You don't need to plant trees there because you're providing shade for people, especially during the morning and the evening hours, because the sun when it's in the top is just going to beat down. There are many tree and shade programs, including one that is being launched here in Scottsdale. And the problem with those programs, quite frankly, is that we have limited resources, and we really need to look at that from a systems viewpoint, because trees require water. And where are we planting those trees? Are we planting them in the Costco parking lot, or are we planting them where people are? Right now, the valley has between a 10 and 11% tree canopy, and most of these plans talk about going up to 25%. And I just want you to think about the places that you live to have 25% of the ground covered by trees. That sounds great, but how are we going to manage all of those assets as well? Then the last one is LIHEAP, and I knew I should have written down what that stands for, but it's Low Income Heat Something Assistance Program, and it's really big in northern states where the colder climates, and it's a federal program that helps to offset home heating costs. And we have a group of very killer advocates here, Wildfire being one of them, that advocated that, hey, if you're going to provide home heating money, you need, in this area, you need to help with offset electricity for air conditioning. So while there is a pot, less than 4% of the people who qualify for it, and the qualification is quite steep, only 4% of the people actually are able to access those funds. Cool pavements, actually here, the largest amount of cool pavements in the world is going on right now in the city of Phoenix. They have painted a community half with this cool pavement, which has kind of like a white grayish coating, and half without it. And just like trees, that you need to plant the right tree in the right place, the same thing is true for cool pavements, that you can't just paint everywhere and hope for the best, because first of all, we have a lot of dust here. But the cool pavements maintain their thermal level by reflecting the heat off of it. So if you are out on a cool pavement road at noon, you are actually being fried from the ground up. So you can see how this is problematic if people say, let's put that in school playgrounds, because that's the last place that you should do it. And I want to give everybody the idea that when you're dealing with extreme heat, you really have to view it from a systems viewpoint, because what's appropriate for one place may not be appropriate for another place. Cool corridors is that same idea. There are many different streets that we're making much more active transportation friendly and putting in all sorts of cooling features, not necessarily just trees. There's artwork that also casts shade, and then there's other shade from buildings and whatnot along the way. But the idea is to keep people cool as they move through their day. This next one, heat-ready cities, schools, and neighborhoods, I'm going to go into more depth later on. This is a project I've been working on. And then having dedicated staff to tackle heat. And the city of Phoenix actually has a chief heat officer. And I think it's just a matter of time, just like how most cities now have sustainability officers or resilience officers here in the valley. We really need to coordinate heat action at the city level and have decisions being made with a heat lens. So if you are going to buy asphalt, let's say, that you're building it not for today's climate, you're putting that asphalt down for the climate 10 years from now so that you don't have a stranded asset. And then my favorite one is social infrastructure, because I think it's really cool to point to things like, look at that energy efficient building, look at this street that we just made beautiful, look at this new walkway. But none of that gets done without robust social infrastructure. So we have a working group, the Arizona Heat Resilience Working Group, that is represented by a bunch of cities, health departments, both the state health department and county health departments, not-for-profits, the Arizona Faith Network, and we really get together to try to share best practices, talk about what works, what doesn't work, and to be far more transparent in how we're tackling these issues. An offset of that is the Arizona Cooling Center Working Group, and this is actually work that I'm really proud of. In 2020, when it became apparent that everything was closing, that we were not going to have community centers, libraries, a lot of public spaces that people go to de facto cool down, when those weren't going to be open, and a double whammy was a lot of the not-for-profits that operate cooling centers. And a cooling center is an indoor air-conditioned location. They weren't going to open because they have a lot of seniors who volunteer to staff it, and seniors weren't coming out. In 2020, I think a lot of people weren't coming out at all. So the Arizona Faith Network actually stepped up, because when we did an optimization analysis of where we need those cooling centers based upon socioeconomic factors, land coverage, they were all in the older parts of the city. And who has campuses in the older part of the city but a lot of faith-based organizations? So the Arizona Faith Network actually did a heroic effort of opening up these closed spaces, staffing them. We had outpouring from a lot of partners, both of the utilities help offset costs, provide free lift rides to and from these cooling centers. We had water bottle donations, and this work continues, but now we're into 2.0 of that. And we not only have cooling centers in faith-based places, but we also have nurses who staff it. And there's a lot more wraparound services that are happening from that as well. And then there's this Tempe Cool Kids program that for people who work with youth might be interested in. It's the same idea that Art was talking about, that we really need to get the youth involved in the solution set that happens along the way. So 2 ideas that I'm really super hot about, no pun intended, but one is a resilience hub, and there's actually going to be a resilience hub going up in the Vista del Camino near the Greenbelt, the Indian Wash Greenbelt. And this resilience hub is not a new idea, and yes, it is a new idea, but this is the idea that you have a trusted community space that people go to. And it operates in 3 modes. So it operates normally. So kind of like this community center, I'm sure they have programming, people know to come here. But then they also have the capacity during an emergency for everybody to come and get water and food and have electricity to charge up your cell phone and whatnot. They're also able to have refrigeration in a kitchen so that if you have medication that needs to be refrigerated. So they're really set, and the idea is that it's a mutual aid network, that it's people helping their neighbors along the way. The tenets of it: to increase community resilience, to increase equity in the communities, and really to help with a carbon transition. So a lot of them talk about having solar panels and then battery backup. In our cooling centers in 2020, only 10% of the cooling centers had battery backup. We're up to 17 or 18%, but still that's woefully underserved. And there's a lot of things that you can do. You can take an existing building and add features to it. And here you see an example on your left. that is from Mercy Corps in Puerto Rico. And they have just been getting walloped by storms there. And there was a storm 2 years ago where not only did they lose power and water, they also lost communications. And you saw pictures of people holding their cell phones up in the middle of the interstate trying to tell loved ones that they were okay. So Mercy Corps, which is an international not-for-profit, they opened, I think they're up to 15 or 16 of them right now, resilience hubs within communities. So this operates like a community center where they have programming, but then they also have water storage, water collection, they have satellite communications, they also have off-grid solar. The picture on the right is what's going on right now in the city of Austin. And they had that snowmageddon, I think about 2 years ago now, where they had snow, they lost power, they lost water, and then to add insult to injury, everyone got $10,000 electricity bills. And they had very beginning ideas of having resilience hubs in Austin, but now they've supercharged those and are moving forward. And the idea there that should that ever happen again, the community would know where to go, that to stay warm and to get food and water. And then also, after the incident, they would also have a centralized place where people could go and work together to work out those bills. Or if you have a disaster where you require FEMA, FEMA could come into the community rather than every individual person trying to figure out how to do that themselves. So in talking with other resilience hubs groupies, we feel that every place should have resilience hubs. They should be as ubiquitous as post offices or elementary schools and neighborhoods. And part of it is that it really highlights the leadership that exists in the neighborhood. I mean, we have some really active folks in the room, some who have titled responsibilities, but everybody knows the mayor in their community or growing up, that this person just knew everything that was going on in the community and how to get things done. And this Resilience Hub format will help amplify the ability of these people to really help everybody. And the idea here also is to have a grassroots ownership of this. So there's a lot of communities that are very suspect of city government, and they've had a lot of broken promises, and for various reasons they do not go into city buildings. And the idea that your neighbors are going to help you would allow those people a different alternative to keep safe and also to help build community. And then the mutual aid network that I had talked about before. There's a lot of money that's coming down to enhance communities. And rather than each community trying to figure out how am I going to get trees on my street by my own, or how am I going to have weatherization, you can have a centralized spot for community funding. And this is something that seems to surprise a lot of people, but if there's a disaster, first responders are not coming to you for at least 24 hours. So that means that everybody needs to have a plan. And wouldn't it be great if you had a plan with other people along the way too? So, like I said, they're starting a resilience hub here in Scottsdale, so if you want to get involved in that, please contact me and I'll forward you along. So, there's Storm Ready. National Weather Service has Storm Ready, and it's a certification program for cities that allocate personnel to be responsible in a storm emergency, and it has protocols of what to do. So the idea actually was Dr. David Hondula's idea 5 years ago. Hey, why don't we have heat-ready cities? And in fact, the heat office in Phoenix is called Heat Ready Phoenix. And this would be that you have a heat lens throughout all of your city operations, but more than that, you have a dedicated person who is pushing these heat solutions along the way. This idea was then expanded to heat-ready schools, because here in Arizona, we do not have a school heat health policy. And there's a pilot program that's going on right now by the Arizona Department of Public Health Services, but it's in the very pilot stages. But we've developed this heat-ready school program that allows for tracking of heat illnesses, because just like how you track your hours, if you track illnesses of children and staff and teachers, you'll have a much better understanding of how to manage heat within your school. And then all sorts of programs that you can access to make the school grounds cooler, because like I said, we want to cool where people are. We want to cool the kids when they're in the playground so that they're not all lining up behind the shade of one tree. Well, if you take that idea one step further And why don't we have heat-ready neighborhoods, where you have neighborhoods that are mobilized to not only take care of each other during a heat emergency, but they're also working together to cool down their neighborhood. And this is actually going to be piloted next year, so if you and your neighbors are interested, please let me know. And we've just developed the rubric for this. And I think that a lot of times when we talk about climate action, we start with like emergency preparedness and landscape level interventions. And this means like trees and paved surfaces. But really, when you do community outreach, particularly into these underserved communities, you really have to understand the community. And I would also say that that's true for most communities. But you need to understand the community completely in order to understand who are the people that you should include, who has not been included, and how can we be inclusive. So if you know that there's another language other than English that's spoken, that you have materials that are available in both languages. Even better, we have these good, better, best metrics. Even better is to make sure that you have meetings that are being simultaneously translated. So these are things that you can do to help build that inclusiveness along the way. And then we have programs, some of them are really fun, like have a fair and have neighborhood get-togethers for building neighborhood cohesion. And then the emergency preparedness piece could fall together naturally because the neighbors know each other along the way. And all of this work could actually start as the foundation for having a resilience hub in the neighborhood. So I'm going to conclude with some thoughts for the future. I hope you got the feeling that there's definitely something that everybody can do in this audience, both for your own personal safety, for the safety of your family, for the safety of your community, and for the safety of your neighborhood. And right here, I listed some of the Scottsdale heat mitigation plan that is underway, and this was part of the study that was done, and it was really trying to address the pedestrian experience of heat. So this is going to be expanded and presented to council in May, so if you want to be a part of that, please do. And then we really need to think about our community and what we're doing. I mean, we heard this video in the beginning all about how these hikers went out, and I really want everybody to give serious thought to when we go out and it's 110 degrees. Why are we hiking when it's 110 degrees? You know, we need to have that discussion as a conservancy as well. And then this is my favorite picture because I don't know who made this sign, but it's just perfect. And the sign, if you can't read it, it says, "Excessive heat is predicted. For your safety, please take necessary precautions before entering the preserve, or you should consider going to the pool instead." So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between heat and special heat mitigation and water? What kind of effect it might have on the drought conditions that we're seeing all over the Southwest?
That's an excellent question, and you know, that's...
Melissa, can you repeat the question?
For the online people.
Sure. So the question from Brett was, can I talk about the relationship between water and heat mitigation? And a lot of that is due to the fact that people naturally go to trees as the response. Oh, we want to mitigate heat, let's plant trees. And then that requires water. Well, you have to look at it from a systems viewpoint. I love to tell the story about how I got involved in this extreme heat work. I moved here from New York to Tempe in 2016. And because I'm in the School of Sustainability, I'm not taking my car. I'm taking public transportation because my bike hadn't yet arrived. And I walked the 3 treeless blocks to catch the little blue bus in Tempe. It's a free shuttle in Tempe. And they didn't even have like a shelter. They just had the stick in the ground for the bus. And I got to work and I said to my boss, who is the founder of the School of Sustainability, I said, "You people are nuts. You have incentivized people to rip out your landscaping. You want everybody to take public transit. It's so darn hot at this thing. You know, I'm a menopausal woman. You're going to kill me on the way to..." And so he said to me, "Well, I think you just figure out your topic that you're going to talk about." But First of all, you have to look at it from a systems viewpoint because not all solutions require water. And we are in drought conditions, but I think that if we judiciously manage when we are going to use water, that's important too, because we use water in generating electricity. So if we had far more efficient mechanical units, that would require less water. So what I'm saying is that we need to look at all the different uses of water, and we recycle a ton of water compared to other municipalities. We need to look at it from a systems viewpoint.
I had a question regarding fire protection, which seems to come up maybe as a conflict with what you're trying to do with greening along roadways, because in Scottsdale they kind of clear the edges of roadways like Scottsdale Road and Pima Road from here to Carefree Cave Creek, and they also encourage people to clear vegetation around their house so their house doesn't burn down if the desert burns up. So isn't there a conflict? How do you deal with fire departments when you're trying to get a lot more vegetation and trees planted when they may be worried about, you know, people parking on the side of the road and burning up the desert?
So the question was about competing commitments and how do you deal with the fire department that requires you to clear out your brush and yet you want to green up the place. Is that accurate? So first of all, it's amazing that a tree can get planted anywhere. I don't know if we have any public works people, but when you go to plant a tree in an urban form, there's underground cables, there's boxes that trees can fit in, and trees don't like to be by themselves in boxes, so it's no wonder that a lot of them do die anyway. There's a question of how to provide water for them. So it's amazing, first of all, that a tree can get planted anywhere. And I think that this idea that you're cleaning out the bottom of the brush, cleaning out brush so that it doesn't catch fire is very good for fire standards and a long-term management of your green infrastructure. I do not have the figures as to whether or not that impacts the cooling of an area along the way. So do we have any women who ask questions? We have 2 men. I'll wait for a woman to ask a question. I come from a gender justice background.
I'm wondering why I'm a snowbird, but to me it seems like it's our community leaders and government that's the responsibility of limiting the building, because basically me coming down here from Washington State, I think every time we come back, the building is crazy. And you think, okay, Lake Powell is at an all-time low, and why aren't the community leaders in this Arizona area limiting the construction of these monster buildings?
So the question is, we have increasing development going on, and you're concerned vis-a-vis heat, water?
It would be heat and water.
And how does that impact? So we have a really interesting water policy here in the valley, that we have the Groundwater Management Act, and in order to build any development, you have to prove that you have a 100-year supply of water. So one way to do that is, one really easy way to do that is to convert farmland, which is very water intensive, into buildings, because that's your 100-year supply of water. And I think that that has been the feeling all along, that that's how we're going to manage our way out of this. I don't think that the situation is as dire here in the valley as it is in, let's say, Las Vegas, Nevada, where if the water level drops anymore, they will not be able to generate power. We don't have that kind of infrastructure here. And I think that saying it's the community leaders, it's not just the community leaders, it's everybody. Everybody has to get involved. I mean, it's kind of like I have a house on the edge, now pull up the ladder and nobody else can have a house on the edge. I think that we need to get together and really understand this as a community, that it's not just going to be one person who loses. If we do lose our water supply, it's going to be everybody along the way. And the first thing that goes is our ability to have produce being made in the immediate surroundings. So I was just testifying before the Affordable Housing Committee, the State Affordable Housing Committee, And there's a whole discussion about that the developers really feel that, look, we satisfy that requirement. But there's also a saying, and I wish I could remember the exact words to it, that just because it's legal doesn't mean that it's ethically right. So we need to really get together and decide how we're going to plan our future. And I think that everybody in this room has a voice and is able to do that as well. Do we have any online? Okay, another question.
I was just wondering if like in the low-income neighborhoods, if they have any program for using like maybe solar power to help reduce their, their power bills, energy bills.
So the question was about solar power and are there special programs for low-income neighborhoods? I'm not a specialist in this, but my hard answer to begin with is no. And in order to have solar put on your house, generally speaking, there's an investment that you need to put in order to then reap the benefits over time. And that's a very middle-class, upper-middle-class idea that I'm going to invest now and I'll have an ability to save over time. There is this idea of community solar and who is going to benefit from community solar, and this is where you have a solar field that the community owns. Generally speaking, the power that's generated from there goes to one person or one corporation. But what if, and this is part of the resilience hubs, what if we could have community solar that benefits people in that neighborhood rather than corporations to help offset their communities? It's very much in the nascent stages. Another follow-up question. Oh, this is going to be juicy.
Well, okay, now about education. I don't know, is heat-wise information shared in the schools for our youth? Because things do start with our youth. And is that something that Arizona communities should be doing, is teaching children, because then they'll go home and talk to their parents, hey, we need to do this, or, I mean, is heat-related issues being taught in the education?
So the question is, do schools have a heat program or a heat education program? And the large answer is no, except for heat-ready schools and the pilot that the Arizona Department of Public Health is putting on. And those materials are widely available online. And we, through the heat-ready schools and also heat-ready neighborhoods, we want to change behavior. We want to have kids check in their friends, like, you mean you came out without a water bottle? Or, you're looking a little like you need to go inside and take a rest along the way. And we also want to make sure that everybody understands this is really serious. All of those people that got caught and either got ill or died, I'm sure they all thought they had a handle on it. Don't worry, I can handle the heat. But no, heat sneaks up on people very quickly. And the select groups that are particularly vulnerable are the young and the old, because you do not have the same thermal regulators that you have. People who have cardiovascular disease, people who have diabetes, people who are taking certain medications. Other than that, don't take Benadryl and go hiking. So there's a whole host of things that make people far more susceptible that we need to make sure that when we're sending messaging out that we're saying it to people who should take it seriously. We have this last mile problem in all of our heat communications. So if you could come up with us, the CDC and FEMA would be really interested in that we have health departments that issue information. In fact, it's on the Conservancy website. But we seem not to get to the people in that last mile, that when they're going out the door, that they're thinking of these things, that they're saying, oh, if I'm gonna go hiking tomorrow, I need to hydrate tonight. So we need to do a better job of that. That's definitely a gap.
Melissa, thank you. My question has to do with the open spaces, the preserve and the green belts. How far out does that help? I mean, we live a mile from one of the trailheads and from the preserve. Does that make any difference to us in the heat issues?
So the question was, in places that have parks or green areas, does that help cool down the area? And the answer is yes, absolutely. There's this notion of a cool park island, and it doesn't even need to be very big. So you saw that Buckeye Triangle spot. There's research that shows that when you green up a space like that and the wind comes through and pushes out that warm area, it actually can cool the neighborhood down. And it depends upon the degrees, because it depends how hot the neighborhood is. But in some cases, let's just say if it's a 5-degree difference, if it cools a 110-degree neighborhood down to 105, like, that's doable, you know? So even having parklets or the Indian Bend Greenbelt is an excellent example of a double good. Not only is it storm mitigation, but it's also cooling that entire area as well. And if you live close to the preserve, you are really benefiting from that preserve cooling down at night.
So that's one more plus of the open spaces.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have research to give you to back that up. I feel like you and I should have lunch, actually.
So in Spokane, in Washington, we have Retree Spokane. And it's where community volunteers get together and they pick certain areas that need more vegetation and rebeautification, whatever, however you want to term it. But it's a really neat, fun community thing. It teaches about basically how important natural vegetation is and how much of a difference it can make. And is there a program like that? I know you talked about the lower income and they didn't want water, but wouldn't the natural vegetation and volunteers, a volunteer group, be kind of a good way to go out and start making a difference?
So the question was about whether or not there are organizations that are pushing private tree programs. And the answer is resoundingly yes. There is an excellent organization in the Valley called Trees Matter, and they are doing exactly what you're talking about. And it's not the planting of the tree, although that's kind of fun. I've been on tree plantings. But it's also the education part of that too. I know I've killed all the vegetation in front of my house because I can't figure out how to water it. But they really educate people, and they have tree checkers that actually come by and make sure that you're maintaining your tree properly. So Trees Matter. Trees Matter gets their trees primarily from the utilities in the valley too. It's an excellent organization.
From the chat.
Sure.
Does reflective heat in the way of painted roads or lighter colored surfaces contribute to global warming?
So the question was for reflective surfaces, using that coating, whether or not it contributes to global warming. And that's a really tricky way to pose that question, because when you're thinking about cool roofs are really great. When you go hiking on South Mountain and you look out over the Phoenix landscape, just about all the roofs are white, and that really helps to offset the amount of energy that you need to cool down the building. So in doing so, you will reduce that greenhouse gas profile along the way. Cool pavements, it does contribute to cooling down the neighborhood, but the jury is not out how much can we quantify that along the way. So it really depends. And sadly, when you get into a lot of these solutions, the first answer is, well, it depends. Because it depends upon the situation, you know? And certainly in reflective surfaces, it depends. Come on, my friend in the back, you're not going to ask another question. So I want to point out for people who come from the Pacific Northwest that there was a heat wave in Portland, and the incidence of air conditioning in Portland is about 15%, I think. So when that heat wave hit, and it was 115 degrees, they were not prepared for that at all. So in many ways, we are very much at the forefront of how to deal with extreme heat, and just by the way that we do things as a matter of course. Like, you wouldn't think of building a playground without a cover. You wouldn't think of building a building without central air conditioning. And as a result, in many ways, we are well positioned here in the valley for a warming environment, far more so than some of these northwest areas. I was working with somebody in Calgary, Canada, and she said to me, well, we had 8 heat morning days. I said, really, what's the temperature? And she said, 78. I said, we call that winter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Thank you for being a steward, and thank you for the great presentation. And thank you to Art and to Justin as well for speaking today. As I mentioned earlier, this is the fall seminar. We do this twice a year, so we'll have a winter seminar. It's not scheduled yet, but look forward to that being posted. Also want to make a shout out to Max. I don't believe she's in the audience here today, but Max Sukanek has been responsible for this and is responsible for setting up this particular session. But she's no longer in the role. She's moved on to the community engagement, and Julie Hitt has taken over Lunch and Learns and the Steward Seminars. So if you have ideas on Lunch and Learns or Steward Seminars, over to Julie. It's great to see you all. Before you go, a couple of things. We don't need to keep the snacks. You can take them with you. Take a handful. And we do need to put the chairs and stuff away in the room, so anybody that can hang out for a few minutes and give us a little help. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.